Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about my favorite fantasy books of all time. So I actually went back through my Goodreads and man, it is a wild ride. It appears that I started using Goodreads around 2012. And this would have been the time when I heavily started getting sidetracked into New Age. So some of these fantasy books on here are pretty predictable, pretty obvious, and some are just from more recently since I have gotten back into my passion of fantasy. But there may be a few books that I actually haven't listed from further in my childhood that I just can't think of right now. But then if I can't think of them, they're probably not a favorite anyway. And I can see, looking back here through my Goodreads, that yeah, I just got so heavily sidetracked. You should see all the New Age kind of books that I was reading. I got heavily into self-help at this time and diverted away from reading literature. But since I have been saved by Jesus, it's funny how my passions have come back. My innocent childhood passions have come back such full force, and I have a lot more focus and dedication to give them now. And I don't have to get sidetracked by all these other things and all these other interests, thinking that they're the thing that's going to actually save me, because my identity is in Christ now. So I just want to go through these favorites with you today, and I'm thinking that I will update them in the future. I still can't get a lot of reading done at the moment because of my son and his demands. So I'm actually going to start by just the date that I have here with the series that I've added. And I do believe that this was probably one of the first fantasy books that I ever read. I don't have it on me now. I don't remember a lot of it. I remember Althulas, the main character. I remember the character he falls in love with, who's actually a cat that follows him around, and she ends up being a goddess, I think. And I remember a house at the end, some sort of interdimensional house that had lots of doors. And there was like a knife. I think he used a knife to like open these doors. So I'm actually just going to read the blurb to you now. Althulas, burglar, armed robber, is paid to steal a book by a sinister stranger named Gend. Althulas sets off to the house at the end of the world where the book is kept. There, in the same room as the book Gend described, he finds a talking cat. What he can't find when he enters around is the door by which he entered. By the time he sets out again, Althulas can read. He's read the book and discovered that the evil god Deva is trying to unmake the world. The cat, whom Althulas calls Emerald, is in fact the god's sister, and she needs Althulas to prevent Deva returning them all to primordial chaos. Althulas will have to teach her what she needs to know, which is how to lie, cheat, and steal. Whatever works, Emerald reflects. Althulas is first and foremost of a band of colourful helpers who will battle Deva and his bizarre, deadly minions. The existence of the whole world hangs in the balance of this glorious epic fantasy. That's pretty much it. That's the blurb. So it was written by David and Lee Eddings, I believe, and you can see where my fascination with sort of even mythology began at a very young age. And even the book that I'm writing now does focus on gods and will have Christian themes woven into it as a series, kind of teaching about certain things with that. But yeah, this is probably where my fascination with that sort of thing began, demigods and things of that nature. So that is probably one of the very first books I can remember, and I hope to read it again one day. I know that I've read it a couple of times. So the next favorite books of all time are the Obernewtyn Chronicles. There is quite a lot of books in this series, and I actually haven't finished it. I believe my love for this series, or just the series in itself, tapered out as I got towards the end of the series. Looking at it now, I believe the last book in the series that I ever read was The Stone Key, because this is the only one that's sounding familiar to me, and the last two covers aren't familiar. And I never wanted to pick up the series past that. So if anyone has finished it and it's good, let me know. But basically in this series, we follow a orphan, I believe, and she is kept at a certain place where certain children have abilities. but it's not exactly a great place for a child to live, and it's set in a post-apocalyptic world. I can't exactly remember what happened in the world. So as it's been a super long time since I've read these as well, and I have glimpses of, you know, what the story was about, I'm actually just going to read from the blurb here again as well. So the Obernewtyn Chronicles is a series of science fiction and fantasy novels by Australian author Isabel Carmody. I didn't know she was Australian. The series has a post-apocalyptic setting and depicts a world long after its destruction by a global nuclear holocaust. The series protagonist, Elsbeth Gordy, is a young girl with mental powers condemned by the series' main antagonists, the governing body known as the Council, and the religious authority, the Herder faction. That's ringing a bell. The novel deals with themes of responsibility, duty, prejudice, discrimination, tolerance, and human and animal rights. I do believe there were companions in this one, perhaps. Animal companions, if what I can remember. And the main thing I remember with her, especially from the very beginning, was telepathy. So she could either hear other people's thoughts or could implant thoughts into other people's minds or put her voice into other people's minds. That's something that's really ringing a bell. I loved this series so much, and if I was to read it again, which I hopefully will get around to when I have more time, I definitely would feel a lot of nostalgia for my childhood. And this series also shares an extra special place with me. I believe it was one of my best friends, Sinead, who introduced me to the series. So it was either I introduced her or she introduced me. I'm pretty sure it was her though. And we started reading it together, and we continued reading it together over the years, although I do believe she also lost interest in it. The next series I want to mention, which everyone probably knows, and I still can't remember very well either, is the His Dark Materials series. I know that this world is actually so well crafted that it goes way beyond the scope of like a child's understanding or a child being able to appreciate it. So that is when I read it. And I believe that if I read this series today, that I would definitely appreciate the aspects of the world building and the magic and the system so much more. So the summary for this one is: a young girl is destined to liberate her world from the grip of the magisterium, which represses people's ties to magic and their animal spirits known as demons. So this is another just beloved treasure from my childhood. I loved the animal companion thing. I still do. It's also another series I hope to get back to one day. The next series I've got here is Eragon. So I was a massive dragon lover when I was a little kid. So I'm talking like I had an entire bookshelf of dragon statues. So my mom would take me out and we would go to places in Australia, like, I can't remember the name now, but it's like a crazy dollar store. So very, very cheap bargain store basically. And they would always have different kinds of dragon statues. I don't know if that's still the case, but I would just collect them from different areas over the years. And I remember like throwing them all out at one point, and I'm actually really sad about that, but where would I keep them all? I had like little baby, they were all like stone statues. They were like not wooden ones or anything like that. They were, I don't know what kind they would be, like, is that clay or ceramic, but painted dragon statues. So I have loved dragons from a very, very young age. And even though I might not want to reread this series, because I did have the books at home and I remember reading them a little older and thinking, that's a little young for me, the writing isn't really taking me anywhere. I enjoyed this series so much when I was young, so I'm just gonna have to put it as one of my favorites of all time. Okay, now the next one on here is the Game of Thrones series. I don't have the books once again. This is a collection though that I would like to get back for here in America, because after I read Dune and after I then read Lord of the Rings, I'm going to attempt Lord of the Rings again, and then I'm going to try and reread Game of Thrones, just because I think the writing is fantastic and it's good to read literature just way above your level as a writer and hope that you could absorb even some semblance of the skill. So Game of Thrones really needs no introduction. I started reading it. A friend introduced it to me probably, I don't know when it would have been, might have been around 2010, and have just waited for each subsequent book to come out and waiting for the last one. So, or is it the last two? I'm not sure. So this is just a classic. No need to say any more. Game of Thrones, it's definitely up there. Okay, now the last three books I actually have a copy of because they're ones that I've read recently. So let me gather them all. Okay, the last three books I have here that I'm going to mention are Circe, Vita Nostra, and Dune. Even though Dune's technically sci-fi fantasy, I'm still going to add it to this list because I think that it fits in. I'll start with the order I've read them in, I guess. So Circe, I picked this up as inspiration for the book I'm currently writing because I am writing about cosmic gods, basically. And I thought that this would be a good pick. And even though it's Greek mythology, so it's not necessarily, well, it is tied in a way. I guess I'm doing it in a more modern version. It had fantastic writing, I think, and description of the gods, especially Helios. I loved hearing about the sun god and how he was portrayed in this book. It was fascinating. So I would say definitely up there at this stage with my top fantasy books of all time. Then I read Vita Nostra. My lord, this book was weird in a good way. I like weird. There's one way to like describe the kind of magic in this book. I don't know how to describe it. It's odd. Multi-dimensional. That is a kind of fantasy I am leaning towards. I love fantasy mixed with strange sci-fi elements. And yeah, if you want a kind of strange read, it's got simple and elegant writing in it. It is about a girl that wakes up to some abilities, basically, and there is Christian elements as well. Yeah, I can't ruin it, but the last few pages, it was like, man, that's what that was all about. And yeah, definitely fantastic read. And then, of course, I'm gonna put Dune in here because I just finished Dune recently, and now it is like definitely at the top because these are the books more suited to me as I am today. The books I'm talking about, seriously, like Harry Potter series, we all love that. But when I have tried to read it again, I can't get back into it in the same way because I am more leaning towards fantasy of a strange kind of multi-dimensional science fiction kind of way. I don't know how to describe the kind of stuff that I'm into, but yeah, so those would be my top fantasy books of all time and the most recent ones that I've read. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments down below, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.